Welcome back to On the Road podcast with myself, Florence Musundwa, the convener of the Road Freight SME Summit. My co-presenter is not with us, Mark Makubalo, today as we resume recording because he's doing all things entrepreneurship. Today I've got two brilliant guests, Ndumiso and Bernard, and we'll be talking all things transport economy with economists. But I want to highlight that this year's summit's theme is agility, is all about making sure that you're agile so that you can navigate the challenges of this highly competitive, complex industry. Gents, welcome.
Thank you so much for having us, Flo.
Thank you for making the time, beginning of the year. I'm very thrilled to have you here. I think I'm going to learn a lot myself. And our audience is also going to learn a lot. Do make sure that as you're listening that you subscribe somewhere there, right? Click the subscribe button and also follow us on our various social media pages before I forget. So guys, today's topic is all things transport economy. But before we get into it, because it's a very important topic, and also just to enable SMMEs around South Africa and them that want to do business in South Africa to know the dynamics of the industry. How has 2024 started out for you? What's your word for 2025?
My word for 2025, I think it's consistency, because a lot of, I think, broadly groundwork has been done, and there's almost as the years progress, there's an interplay across all of the years. So once one is able to ensure the consistency across all of the work that one does, I think that's when the real results come. And that's across every facet, whether it be work, life, investments, whatever.
Is that your personal word as Ndumiso?
Yes.
Like your word is consistency.
Yes.
One of the hardest things to keep.
It's difficult. Yes. It's
Keeping up the momentum of consistency.
Yes.
But on that note, just tell us more about what your guys' company does.
So KH Research Equity Partners is an advisory firm that also has some private equity interests as well. We focus mainly on economic advisory, and so we provide broad support to organizations at a public policy level, strategy, research, and also some modeling support as well.
Oh, no, great. Bernard, you're a very popular face now in the industry. Like Ndumiso is a very popular face. I call him the voice of South Africa's economy. Yeah. But you are also very, very popular, an expert to a very large extent, a specialist in this industry. What is your 2025 word?
I'd add on in terms of what Ndumiso said. I think it's all about well-being, whether it's financially, career, family. It's about finding the balance. Because
you guys worked too hard last year and you lost balance. Now you are recalibrating. I need balance in my life.
Yeah, because you never know what, especially life will throw at you. So if you're not well balanced, it will take you out like that pothole that you don't anticipate on the road. So if you don't align your car well, it will show you that. So yeah, for me, it's finding the right balance in everything you do.
Yeah.
So
you're a senior specialist at ABSA, focusing on transport and logistics. What does your day-to-day work look like? What do you do?
You wake up and you try and solve challenges. It's the complexity of it. It's you trying to solve someone's challenges because that person has entrusted you to be their financial partner. So when you're in partnership, it's a marriage.
Yeah.
So those who are married would know that you are not happy every day. Sometimes you've left your clothes on the floor, and we need to do that. Valentine's is coming up. You become romantic with your partner. So yeah, it's a relationship where it has its ups and downs. So it's basically supporting them in terms of their financial decisions in their expansions, but also when they need to also maybe divert their businesses. And also when they are maybe in unfavorable conditions, you still come in. So you don't only show up when the business is doing well. You also go in when they're saying, I've lost a contract. And then you need to reposition the business. So that's what a financial partner is. So that's what I do in terms of the sector that I operate in. I come in and look at it strategically. How do I support that business? And from an SME all the way to a corporate, if I may put it. So it's also understanding who am I seeing today? What are their needs? I do not wear one cap fits all kind of vibe. So yeah, that's what I do on a day-to-day.
Awesome, awesome. You guys have fallen, you are in a relationship with road freight. Taken from your words of road freight. And I would like us, to start having conversation around the industry. You were informing me earlier that it's growing at a 9%. It employs just transport, because road freight is supply chain, logistics, transportation. Just the transportation part, which is partially what we're going to be focusing on, employs over 800 people, 800,000.
Yeah.
Right? I nearly did a math thing. Guys, it was something else. Yeah. And I mean, it's a very dynamic, a very competitive, ever-changing industry, and yet it has great potential and contributes quite much in our economy in South Africa. Ndumiso, let's start with just looking at the economy of South Africa before we hone into the industry. Where are we? What should FML Logistics be thinking about before we get into the industry, just as South Africa?
I think, so the South African economy is, I would broadly define it as a knowledge-intensive and services-based economy. Oftentimes, if we were to compare the South African economy to our counterparts on the African continent, it's a distinct feature that we have. And what that really means is that our economy is largely driven by service industries like the transportation industry specifically, and is also quite knowledge-intensive, where you see, business services, finance, and all of the being a big contributor in terms of the nominal GDP of the economy, which is different from our counterparts on the rest of the continent. The second part, I think it's also a relatively small economy, accounting for less than 1% of global GDP, and it's also quite open. So we trade with with a lot of trade partners wherever it makes sense. South Africa also trades as well, and of course we have very key socioeconomic challenges that we face, which are also another unique feature. Whether we compare the South African economy to advanced economies or our counterparts, which are other developing economies, inequality, number one, unemployment, usually number one, poverty, also amongst the highest. So these are interesting sort of contradictions that also exist in the South African economy, which also present risks and opportunities, because once I think we're able to resolve for them, it then provides significant opportunities for growth. The workforce that we have is also a big plus for our economy. We have people of working age that are available to work. So if we're looking for growth, regardless of whichever industry, you know that you have the manpower to fuel that, which becomes quite important, because when comparing it to other advanced economies around the world, they have declining populations. One of our biggest trading partners, China, has a declining population. Countries in Europe, declining populations. Even in the US, their population is also in decline as well. We found certain instances where companies, for instance, in New York, to attract talent in the organizations, the incentives that they offer, to the extent to say, look, we'll actually pay your bond, but just come through and work for us. So those are some of the competitiveness issues that arise as a result of the phenomenon that has been taking place in the global economy, and where the South African economy is also features in this global context.
But you talk about our human capital and it as a competitive advantage, but we're still standing at a very high rate of unemployment. So where's the missing gap? Because there is a missing gap. Bernard, with what Ndumiso just said, how should an SME position themselves? How do I grow? Ndumiso has mentioned competitive advantages of what makes us unique, highlighted the importance of the transport industry. It's difficult grow. So with all of this for 2025, how do SMEs position themselves to grow?
I think, just to touch on what Ndumiso has said, and I'm looking at it where the growth rate.
Yeah.
You need to look at the growth rate. We haven't hit the numbers from 2010. So from 2010, I think it's 15 years now. If you look at our growth rate for the last 10 years, still a single digit. I think nothing above 3%. So
I think beyond one.
So if you're going into that economy, and your projections are beyond that, but you are not seeing it nationally, that's where it starts. I cannot aim to grow my business by 10% if I'm in an economy that has never exceeded 3%. So that's where it starts.
Yeah.
But okay, am I projecting my long-term vision accordingly? Because it's never happened in 15 years. We had the World Cup, and then I think that's where we're at now. So that's where I would start, where I look at the
You're
economy.
saying they mustn't be too ambitious.
You can, because remember, it depends on which sector you're going into.
Yeah.
You break it down as we have the conversation.
Yeah.
But you look at our economic growth rate and also projections from various publications that are available. If someone is saying South Africa in the next 3 years, it's 1.5 growth rate, what does that mean for where you are going into? What are you going to be coming in and doing differently to increase that 1.5 to 2? Because if you're going to come in and decrease it, you're not adding value. That's one thing. And then something you've touched on, high unemployment. I look at it and we say, but we have a lot of youth that are unemployed, but why aren't they getting employed? How are we looking at the fact, do we have skilled labor to take up those positions? So we also need to do a skills audit in various sectors. Do we have the right skills to partake in the economy? So that's another thing that I would say you need to assess as you go into the sector, that would I have the right skill labor to come and drive my vision or purpose in terms of my business. And also something very interesting, it's an economic concept that we use, unlike accountants, is usually the old one. It's usually people, planet, profit.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I've realized that we need to walk away from that. And I might be contradicting myself, where I am saying we need to start looking at things differently. I have 3 new P's that I have came up with, where it's still people. And when I speak about people, it means, are you in your own organization still training or giving them skills to keep up with the world? And something where I like, we have Florence today, where someone said something very profound, that you should not fear tech, which I'm referring to AI. You should fear the people who are using it, your competitors. Because if you're not using it, you're going to be left behind. So those are the skills when I'm talking about labor, the people. And then you also look at something, processes. Is your processes streamlined? Whoever's coming in, remember when you employ someone, they're here to drive your vision. So if they come in and there's no process, I'm going to be doing something that I think is right for the business, but it's not the vision that we want to have for the business. So that's another one. And also lastly, I think it's purpose. You know, if I don't understand the purpose of why am I here, I might come in here and talk about the party I went to last night. You're talking economic stuff because I don't understand the purpose that I'm trying to drive. That's the vehicle. So those are the 3 P's: purpose, people
process.
And process. For me, that's the 3 P's. Those things will bring you the profit.
The 4th P. That we all want. That's the one that we want. You know what you just said? It just brings me back to, I had my own personal reflection around what it is that I'm trying to build. And I realized that, you know, oftentimes we expect things from people that we do not train them to. And you just automatically think because you know, everybody ought to know, or because you have been exposed, everybody ought to be exposed, and they should be at a particular pace like, you know, you have. And before we move in the conversation, Ndumiso, you also an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you've had, you know, that challenge where you get in, you're like, hi, you're starach, like, you know, this, and this, and because you're trying to remain competitive, etc., etc. What would you say to an SME struggling with that in this present moment, with these 4 P's that Bernard just mentioned, that there's what? Purpose, process, people to get to profit. What would you say as, like, in this segment of positioning yourself for 2025 for the growth you want?
What you're mentioning and what Bernard has also mentioned is quite important, because it speaks to, I guess, the competitiveness of our businesses. And oftentimes to transfer knowledge or to transfer skills, for the ability to do that requires training itself. And so I think the first part is to have a very frank and honest conversation around what are the capabilities that exist within our organization, and where do we potentially have blind spots, and where there are blind spots, how can we fill those blind spots? Either we leverage people that we know that have those skills to transfer some of those skills so that we have those capabilities in the firm. And of course, being in business and entrepreneur, you can be creative. If there are constraints and resources, find creative ways in which to work with, to partner up with those people to acquire those capabilities for that firm. And that can also translate into other ways, collaborations in terms of pursuing other business opportunities as well. So that's where I guess the other aspect of the word of innovation that we tend to speak about quite often. And even on that particular point, one of the things that the South African Bureau of Standards actually works on are the issue of standards across industries, right? And one which I found quite interesting is the standards that are related to innovation management systems. And so the idea that innovation oftentimes is taken as a sort of creative, beanbags process, and we're able to be innovative. But
colorful ones.
colorful ones in the office, and there we have innovation. But there's some practitioners and scholars that have devoted their thinking around this idea and how organizations can leverage this idea of innovation in a systematic way in our day-to-day organizations. And I think that is a framework when looking at the standards that are available now at the SABS website and so forth. That can be a framework that can provide organizations to enable them to be competitive. And this speaks to also identifying where are the gaps, how can we fill in those gaps, and how can we step change our competitiveness in order to address those gaps. Pardon me.
Practically, Bernard.
Yeah, I was going
Hey, SMEs don't train drivers. And that's why we've got so many accidents, right? So with what Bernard has, what Ndumiso just said, right? Again, Zbosiso logistics, 20 drivers. He doesn't have a budget to train his drivers. Neither does he have a budget to train his fleet controller or his staff, and even himself, he doesn't have the budget. How does it then translate what Ndumiso just gave us a framework? How does it translate day to day
to that SME?
To Zbosiso logistics? I don't even know if there's a Zbosiso logistics, but it's just a name.
Hopefully after this.
It's a brief shout out to that business.
Blessings logistics, yeah.
I'll just bring it a step back, and I'll say to that SME who's getting into any sector, especially road freight, when you are having conversations, are you only having one-sided conversations? And I say this, Zbosiso Logistics as our case study. As I go to Florence Logistics that's doing well with 20 trucks, am I not going to that guy who just got into business rescue where his trucks got repossessing? What went wrong? Because if you do not investigate why are people leaving the industry, what sort of challenges do they meet, those challenges haven't left the industry. It means they are being transferred to you. Like you keep on saying, skills is transferred, even challenges are going to be transferred.
True.
I've been exposed where, and I'll use a typical example where I usually ask the guys who've been in transport for more than 30 years, why don't you do certain routes? And he says, no, I'm leaving it for the small guys. It's a nightmare. So
but
if someone has experienced a 30-year nightmare, how are you going to overturn it? Do you have the capital to go and overturn it? So for me, it's as you are doing your research into going to whatever commodity or business, have the successful guys, but also go to the guys who came in and failed. They will teach you and they'll tell you the blind spots, like you said, that, you know what, I did not invest in my business. I did not train my drivers. Or as I expanded in terms of assets, but not the soft skills. I still wanted to do my HR myself. It was nice when I was doing it with 2 employees, but now I have 40 people in the business, and now 20 didn't get paid because of my blunder. I was on the road. I'm trying to wear all hats. So that's where I usually walk into a business and I say, you are now, maybe you have 20 trucks. Now your fleet is at 60, but your personnel has not grown. So it means the work that whoever's doing in HR has doubled, but I do not see your operational costs in terms of salary and wages doubling. So it's only where the growth seems to be in your pocket. I see your Ford Mustang parked outside, but I do not see it overall in the value chain. And those are things, honest conversations we should have. That.
And I guess what you're saying, unless you sit with another expert on the other side, nobody's able to give you that analysis. And it's very informed analysis. But I want us to move. We have to have them back into where we do proper, we break down transportation business into its various departments and literally ask people, what are you doing in operations? Are you thinking about this? What are you doing for drivers? Are you thinking about this? What are you doing in compliance? Are you thinking about that? And what are the cost-effective ways? And Ndumiso talked about collaboration. And I find that a lot of SMMEs, especially in this industry, people don't know where to go or where they could potentially get business development support that will not cost them financially, might cost them in their time and them submitting certain things so that, they are compliant. But it's a conversation I think we need to have to assist people. But let's get into the economics of road freight. Fuel prices have gone up. They've been going up since 2021, apparently 20%. Correct me if my stats are right, Yes, we use DeepSeek and ChatGPT, but sometimes information might just be a little bit outdated, right? Into the industry that you've already mentioned, how it's growing. Ndumiso, what should an SMME be doing that a big logistics company is doing for them to remain in the business? Because when fuel prices increase, operational costs increase. You have to oblige to the bargaining council, labor, you have to pay people certain things. And oftentimes, bigger organizations are doing certain things that don't cost them much, that smaller guys are not doing to survive in this industry. What should they be thinking about?
And I think, again, it requires leveraging the capabilities that, as you suggested, potentially also exist elsewhere. But I think the planning function in business becomes quite important, especially in a business like this one. If you're able to have capabilities of individuals who can give you an outline around 2025 from a costing point of view, and depending on how you do your budgeting, whether it's activity-based budgeting or zero-based or whatever the case might be.
Other people don't know that. They just know.
and for a sector like this one, that is crucial.
Because I sorry, just to interrupt, I read that a lot of them don't even know what is their cost per kilometer. So your truck can be on the road, you think you're making money, but when you break it down, you're not making money. So you can continue.
And that's why it's so important, because it then leads to the point around, if you have capabilities, like for instance, you have Bernard who's able to sit down to say in 2025, we're likely to see your costs increase by this much. What does that mean for your planning, for the management of your assets, the routes that you're taking? Is it viable or not? The kind of partnerships that you're striking? And ultimately, from an economic standpoint, what is the marginal return that you're getting based on the decisions that you're making? Whether you're hiring one additional person, does that add value to your bottom line or not? To really get the fundamentals of that. And from the onset, it does sound intimidating. But when you're able to have an expert, for instance, like Bernard, to sit you down and give you the fundamentals of it, you are much more equipped to be as competitive as the big guys. And then over a medium term, or say 3 years, you're able to see the improvements in terms of what you're able to sweat out of your business in doing so. And so I think the planning function becomes first and foremost a crucial step for businesses to really consider whether or not do we really understand how we're going to roll out our work in 2025, and how will that lead us to a vision that we have over 3 years?
And I'm going to take it from there around planning, because a lot of SMEs don't have time to plan. Guys, how hectic. And with what Ndumiso just said, Bernard, what are the triggers that are contributing to this particular sector growing at the rate that it is, that an SME needs to know for them to add it in their planning? Because you just hear, no, it's growing at 9%. You don't know whether is it because of this, whether it's because of that, and how people are exploiting the growth.
Interestingly, Flo, I thought Mark was going to be interviewing us. So as I prepared this, I was going to quote what Flo said. Now she's here. So there's something that you do on your social media platforms. You're always encouraging SME businesses in any sector that you need to keep insight and update with local and international news. And I looked at this statement and I say, Flo is always putting this out there. What does it mean in business terms? And
Quote me.
and I looked at it, it's 3 things basically. Flo is saying, keep up with the regulations of your industry, internationally and locally. And then secondly is, you need to understand your geopolitics, because whatever you are moving comes from a producer or a manufacturer and it's going to a consumer. If the consumer cannot receive what you are transporting anymore because of geopolitics, you are part of the value chain. You are going to be affected. And also something that you said, most of our guys, they think getting into transport, it's the day when you land a contract. And I think that's the make or break, because like I said, we use a lot of historical data to make decisions. One thing interesting, like I said earlier when I mentioned to you, having sat with CAs and CFOs yesterday, they are changing their mindset, saying, when you plan now, do not plan on the past, plan on the future. And when you plan in the future, you're going to think about risks, because you won't see a gloomy picture. So for me, it's those three things that Flo says always look at: tariffs, price shocks, supply chain disruptions. So if I'm going into road freight, and one thing we should tell our road transporters, fuel will never come down. It will always be an obstacle. So put it aside. Do not come and say your business did not work because of fuel increases. Incorporate that into your plan, that I'm going into this business where fuel will always increase. How do I navigate? So as you land that contract, going back to my first point, ask yourself, is this an existing or a new contract? If you are told it's an existing, again, the one who got out, why did they get out? Why did they get out? What am I getting myself into?
And
So
the ones that are closing shop, why are they closing shop?
You know what you might find, and something you said about routes, you might find that your projections, cash flows, you are thinking that I am going to move commodity A to point B, I'm getting 15 rand per kilometer, but only to find that this is not what's going to happen here. As you collect, you'll be delayed. As you deliver, you'll be delayed. The route you are using is not smooth. As the fleet comes back, there's tires that you thought will be replaced in 6 months. They're now replaced every month. Now, added to that, when fuel increases, if fuel increases just reminds you of your operational inefficiencies. Fuel just reminds you that you did not plan enough reserves for this, because all the profit or margins that are made, they keep on tackling these challenges. Fuel for me is just a cherry on top on the cake. But if the yeast and the flour and the eggs are not correct, that cherry is just a part of that. So that's the planning I want to see from a transporter, that contract, as you receive it, are you taking into consideration, will this rate be able to carry me as I go into 2025? And also, like going back to geopolitics, what happens if there is an increase in the commodity? And remember the consumer. If consumer, remember what we were taught about substitute of goods. If I see that this is expensive, I no longer want it. I go to a different commodity. What does that mean for me as being part of this value chain? So also we must also remember that transport is not in isolation. It's you need to understand the other sectors. You need to understand what's going on in manufacturing. If you're moving things from mining, you need to understand if there's a labor dispute in a mine and you're moving commodities, you won't feel it now because production means there's still things you need to move. But in 6 or 8 months' time,
you're gonna feel it.
Like Accelero metals, they still have stock for a year. Whoever's transporting there might think, there's no impact. I'm still getting loads. Come 2026, your truck will be there and they will look at you as if, but we announced that we are closing shop. Those are the things you need to ask. What is the long-term impact that will have on my business? Do I still want to chase this contract for a year? Or do I start diversifying and going to other commodities?
So with, as you're mentioning that in geopolitics and its effects on different commodities, I read something very interesting, but it's I know it's 2023 to 2024, right? But they say that a typical delivery of fresh produce from Limpopo to Cape Town, so transport costs increase by 1,500 rands per load, reducing the profitability of these goods for SMEs involved in their transport. And it obviously is going to continue because inflation is there. And I want to tie for instance, if I'm transporting fresh goods, right, there are geopolitics around various influences on the prices of the goods, on the export prices of the goods. We don't know if AGOA will continue, for farmers in South Africa. It's all different, is it coal? Is it platinum? Is it and most of our prices, even oil, for instance, we do not decide it in South Africa. It's decided for us. So Ndumiso, what should an SME know as to what to ask about what influences the price? You get what I'm trying to say? It's so important for me to know, at a trade, coal has been trading at this much, and therefore it means XYZ. What is it that they should know about these changing prices, the influences of these prices in their planning in their business?
Yeah, I do think that Bernard has actually provided a very clear understanding of what are the drivers that would influence those things. I think from a cost driver point of view, the question of fuel is a common cause. Of course, the most recent development around tariff discussion globally and its potential impacts in terms of whether or not goods can be moved in a certain area or not, that is likely to, of course, push prices upwards. So there's an upside risk towards pricing there. From a South Africa point of view, labor becomes quite important. So we do have a season of industrial actions in the South African environment. To what extent do we factor that in terms of our planning? And what are the anticipated sort of expectations from drivers and so forth in that environment? The other part is when it comes to the South African Reserve Bank, when they announce issues around interest rates, if you're financing your assets, to what extent are you likely to see an increase or a decline in terms of the interest that you pay on the assets that you're financing? The risks right now for 2025, beginning 2025, seemed to be moderate. But of course, depending on how things proceed later in the year in terms of, trade protectionism and inflation might go up, and the Reserve Bank might not necessarily cut as we anticipated. Although this year we would have anticipated a 0.5% cut in terms of 2025. That is still out there to see how things pan out. So those are, I think, some of the things that play an important part in terms of driving up costs. Another element that I think actually
this thing is not a thumbsuck thing, eh?
No.
You can't just thumbsuck and say, hey, I'm
Not
going to
at
grow
all.
like this and I'm buying, I'm going to go to this OEM. And because I think a lot of people kind of thumbsuck. These purchase orders are lined up, But yeah, continue.
I found interesting what Bernard mentioned around where profits are growing. Are they growing in the business or in your pocket?
Your pocket, yeah.
And there's a term that we tend to play around with and say, yes, we know inflation, but there's also the idea around lifestyle inflation. So the moment we get a contract that appears on the face of it to be decent, you already plan, hey, it means I can buy that house, can buy that car. Then I'll just keep my stuff at this rate. Then we're doing well. and so you find that the inflation is not necessarily on the business side, but it's your own lifestyle inflation that's really a detriment to your own business. So that becomes another cost driver that as business people, as entrepreneurs, we need to be disciplined around. To what extent does our lifestyle inflation impede the growth of the business? And I think that's
it's the first time I hear
one.
#lifestyle inflation. But it's so true.
Indeed,
it's
it
very,
is.
very true. Like, I'm going to take my child to that private school.
Yes,
and then, but when I'll pay you there. Stay there.
Property 24 now is active.
Bernard, with what we just said, how does then, again, back to that 9% right, growth, how do I now take advantage of the opportunities? Where do I go to unlock opportunities for my business to grow?
Okay.
Because, and now let me just substitute what I'm saying. Remember, there's also the new developments of like Line Booker. Where now things are concentrated, loads are now on one platform. So how do I find, I'm not going to close my business, it's decent, but I need to unlock opportunities. Where do I go?
Okay. I'll start at home where I'm part of a financial institution.
Yes.
As you're getting a financial partner, what is important now, it's not about transactional account. It's three things for me, and I'll quote our ED colleagues, Stace and KK. where they say, is this financial partner giving me...
I'm going to take that shot. Ne? And I'm going to send it to them. And I'm going to say, hashtag
Yes.
sponsorship.
Because it obviously it's financial inclusion. Second, it's the non-financial support that you'll be getting from your financial partner. And the third one, what market access are you going to be giving me? Because you have a bigger value chain.
But a lot of people
Those are
don't
the three
ask
things.
that, though.
You should don't just give me my check account. Give me those three things. Access to market, non-financial support, where I realized, oh, this is how you're doing your books. No, this is a traditional manner. This is how other successful businesses, this is the software. We will come in. I know our ED does it a lot, where they look at your bookkeeping, your HR policies. Those are the things where you come in and you try and equip the business. But going back to Ndumiso's point, I like that you touched on interest rates. I'm going to play devil's advocate and say, in fact, I have it in my fridge where I have all the dates when the announcements of the MPC will take place, because it's an exciting day in the household. But as a business person, do not wear your private individual capacity hat when the interest rate drops or goes up. Because I say this, interest rate cuts means we get excited. Let's go to the OEM. Let's get the fleet. But for me, and I've done this since varsity, I own government bonds. I don't get excited. Remember my return. Like now, when it dropped, I'm starting to think, should I take my money out of the SA government bonds, place it elsewhere? Remember, this is the money the government is planning to use for your infrastructure and to regulation. We spoke about what government's role is. But if they don't get that investment, and I pull out because of the interest rate, what happens in terms of the sector you want to go to that is infrastructure intensive, and the investor is pulling out? So you need to also think that no one wants to invest in us because of our interest rate that is low. They're taking money elsewhere. So I'm going into it. So you need to look at both sides of the coin. So that interest rate should not excite you whenever it gets cut. You should also look at what the impact does it have for my business. So those are the things that I like, that he touched on the interest rate, that we are quick to run to the OEM.
What you're saying
but
is
no,
so
you
important.
need to look at who does it also
Both
impact.
sides, yes.
So would you invest your money when you can see I'm only going to be getting what is our interest rate now?
Prime is at 7. No, repo is 7.05 now.
Yeah. So if elsewhere, if our neighbors, Botswana is giving me 9, do I say I'm loyal to this country as an investor?
I'm loyal to my pocket.
I'm probably it's got to boon to this country. I'm gonna stick it out. So those are the things I want business people to think. Don't leave it to the big corporates. Think as an SME. Think, but
Yeah, no, you see why we have to do this kind of conversation all the time or every month. It's because it's things that any person that is being told, start a business, because it's a big thing now. Even yesterday, the president is talking about transformation fund and ABC, and people should start businesses. But you're not taught as to actually how to think about the drivers, the triggers, the influences of these industries that you want to go into, that you have a dream of being a multimillionaire, and it might not come into fruition. But let's move right along to government policy regulation. Rail to road or road to rail. In South Africa, freight accounts road freight, 85% of transportation, so it's still on road. Conversation is Transnet, right? So I liked what you said earlier offline. What if Transnet really works?
Yes.
What does that mean to FML logistics? Because there goes your commodity on rail. What would you say SMEs need to know about this conversation? And if Transnet, or should we say when, works? Why listen, for
me, I'm excited by the topic.
And it's please share your thoughts, Bernard, on this.
I'm a scholar bit from Prof. Having because I studied at Stellenbosch, so he does a lot of research in terms of rail. In fact, on Friday I sat in one of his presentations. We had him at APSA, and the first thing we should tell a transporter that bulk commodities don't belong on the road; they belong on rail. If you travel to any country, especially developing or emerging markets, if you find coal on the road, they
It's a
have a problem.
Yeah.
Hence, our economy is not growing. So I'll give you a case study on an
I
example.
like what you just said now. Hence, our economy is not working, and
Yeah.
you'll touch on that as to the effects.
So think about it. You are literally trying to go and fill a ship at the port that could have been filled by 2 or 5 trains with your fleets. Now, for efficiencies in the transport sector, someone should be collecting from the mine to the nearest railway line.
So you're
How
telling me I
many
must
trips?
sell my fleet where?
No,
That's
you
what
should.
you're
No, I'm
saying.
not saying that. I'm saying that if
Must be
Transnet
on your
works,
risk register.
if Transnet works,
Yeah.
our transporters will make more profit.
Mm-hmm.
They should not think that if Transnet works, they will lose
How
out on
will they
business.
make more profit?
Rail is fixed.
Mm-hmm.
So rail cannot be moved where rail cannot get from producer to its
Yaha.
line. So if we are sitting here and we produce this lovely flour, it needs to get to the nearest railway line. Now imagine if you are just picking up from this point to the railway line instead of taking this all the way to Durban and facing the infrastructure and the congestion that you'll be facing
And
and
losing
fuel efficiencies. And also remember, you've bought an asset that's not meant to be doing those trips. So it means your maintenance and repairs and wear and tear increases. So you're not getting profitability from the asset you've purchased. In other states, someone is just doing those short trips. They're getting more out of their vehicle. So that vehicle is making them more money. So what we should be driving is we should have that collaboration between rail and road. So for me, I always use it as if it's what I say it's an R&R. I know it's a favorite product, but those two, they go hand
It is
in
an
hand.
R&R product,
Yes,
eh?
it's an R&R.
Yeah.
These two need to work in hand. But if our road is going to carry rail, we are not going to see this business thrive. And now it goes back to your favorite topic, geopolitics. If India is not receiving their coal in time, they go fetch it in Australia and they cancel all the contracts they have with the mines. You are part of that value chain. Because remember, the delays at the ports, also, you are trying to fill that ship with your fleet. So if the train can carry all of this and we get it in time, because remember, it's just in time when it comes to manufacturing. So if that's not happening, that's why you've seen the troubles in the coal industry. Because if manufacturing stops in India because they are waiting, because we have delays on our roads at the ports, they go elsewhere where they get it in time and they can pay a higher price. They don't mind. You rather pay for a higher price to know that you are getting your end product out. So that's the exciting part about rail and road. That's one thing you need to let your transporters be aware of, that, hey, even if rail works, I need to make sure that I am close to my business in such a way that I still land contracts that will be moving from producer to whether it's fresh produce, whether it's bulk commodities, whether it's automotives. And I think just to add before you move to Ndumiso, I was very privileged that I grew up in Esland Park, where you have a Transnet depot, if you know Esland Park.
Yeah.
So as a young boy, I used to go and count the number of carriages that were carrying automotives and coals. Unfortunately, if I
So
go to
what you're doing is destiny, my guy.
Yeah.
if I look at a youngster today and I tell them that,
They
you
used
know,
to be-
we used to play to go and count the number of carriages that are carrying cars or coal. They've
they
never
barely
seen
see
that.
them, yeah.
Yes.
It's like I'm
It's odd.
a dinosaur
Yeah, it's
to
very,
them.
very odd.
So it's quite interesting how things have transformed.
And
And
they're
that's when
still
you used to
gonna
see
continue.
growth.
Yeah.
When you used to see those trains and you used to say, yo, this is a snake. That was growth. I'll leave it at that.
Ndumiso, also back on government and policy. What
Yeah.
we're talking after? What Africa Free Continental Trade
Yes.
Agreement?
Yeah.
It's a buzzword, trying to hype us up. Bernard is not sold by it. That it's going to bring so much growth and X
Yeah.
amount of, I think, over 1 million trucks are going
Yeah.
to be needed. Da 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 da. Do you think SMEs should be paying attention to it with the current issues that we have with cross-border challenges? Do you think so?
I think in the long
And
term.
I'm pro it, it mustn't come across as if we're not pro it. We just
Yes,
risk
yes.
register.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think in the long term, it's at a strategic level, it's something to consider what it means for your potential operations and for your growth. Because it comes from the Abuja 1991 treaty, which is similarly borrowed from how the European Union was built and the interconnection between trading blocs. Even in the US, the having the United States of America, how would road and rail work in that kind of environment? And so it's driven from those similar concepts. Of course, we have unique challenges in the African continent and in the African environment that would need to be overcome. And I think based on where the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is at now, I believe it's there are about 9 or 7 steps to get to the ultimate sort of point. And I think now we're at step 7, although from a timeline point of view, we're about 5 years behind. And so over the past 30 or so years, there has been some gradual progress, but the delay in the progress towards getting to that level has been associated with the unique challenges that we face on the continent. So that's why I think if you're in this business in the long haul, it's something to think about. And I think also it's also something to think around how you make connections across the continent. Because some of those areas or some of those opportunities that arise can be optimized through the connections that we make through other business people across the continent in terms of the transportation of goods, and even playing a part potentially in the actual infrastructure of those, and making contributions in terms of which routes are the most viable to build and so on and so forth. So in the long term, I do think it's something that's important to consider.
Interesting. Round off now the conversation, and I'm going to ask you about your advice to the SMME. You've said a lot, but I know there's something that you really want to say to them. And more trucks, more money. More trucks, more risk. What would you, as just a takeaway for an SME 2025, looking into 2030, where the world will completely yet again be different, because we didn't even talk about technology, the changing landscape of just trucks themselves and what OEMs are doing. I know Bernard is one of your, focuses. What would you like to be your parting words?
Sure. My parting words, I think, for today's episode is to really invest in focusing more on your planning function. I think that becomes quite critical. And I think this episode does offer key nuggets in terms of practical ways to be able to do that. And if you're thinking about in the long term, just a related industry which might not appear related on the technology side, where you have investment in data centers on the African continent of around $300 billion. 2/3 of that are investments in South Africa.
Really?
Yes. So that also says something around the e-commerce industry. What is the implications of the growth and the spike of e-commerce as it relates to road, freight, and so on? So I think this investment in the planning function becomes quite important even in a difficult environment. Bernard mentioned the question of the growth rate. Even in a 1% growth environment, you might be able to identify a sweet spot in your industry that can give you a 5% or 10x growth because of investing in that planning function.
Hey, man, re hloka capacity to plan, guys. You need the right skill set to help you to plan. Yes, because we say all these things and we think all of these things are available to SMEs. We think most SMEs have this very big network of a kitchen table, a cabinet that they can just bring Bernard and Ndumiso, 3 extra people and say, okay, guys, are a planner now, and look into these things. But capacity. Bernard?
Yeah, just to round it off, and I agree with Ndumiso some of the points that he's made, but I'll just take it a notch down and say, as you strategically plan for the year, perhaps look at 2 things. Whatever you are getting yourself into, like I always use, as you get that contract, is it emancipation or is it empowerment? And I'm going to use an example. So empowerment for me is teaching someone how to read a temperature. Now we know that today it's 26 degrees. I should not wear my jacket. Let me wear my vest. You are empowered. You have that knowledge. But emancipation is me having the thermometer or aircon remote control, saying I'm going to control it's 27 degrees. I'm going to make it a bit cooler in the room. You're adjusting to the risk of it's hot. So as you land that business deal or you're in that business conversation, you should look, does it talk to your strategy? Because what I've seen is people have wonderful, innovative ideas, but along the way, there's no purpose. Remember the 3 Ps, where you are now driving someone's vehicle for them to get to their purpose. You said you like, I have mining background. I want to move commodities because I understand where they are going. now this person is now moving agri stock and he knows nothing about farming because somebody said there's money there.
Yes,
You've
yes.
gone. It might not be profitable for you, and you might be at the end that is not doing well in terms of looking for those sweet spots. You'll get the sour spots. Yeah. So you need to leverage from your niche and skills. That SWOT analysis, it's still key in business. And we see, you said SMEs don't have a lot of resources. Let's go back to basics. Let's do a SWOT analysis.
Yeah, no, past that. Past that.
Yeah.
You know, thank you, James. You know, as I'm thinking what's going to be like as I round off, it's numbers don't lie. Sometimes they do.
Depending on presenting them.
Depending on who's
That's true.
presenting it.
Yeah.
But it's important to take them into account,
Yes.
right? Follow the money, but don't follow the money blindly. You can never run away from not having a why. Purpose is central. And with that, we thank you. I thank you guys. And we'll see you on episode 8 as the On the Road podcast always, must I say emancipated?
Yes.
The Road Freight SME Summit.
Yeah.
It is here to educate you, give you informative data points for you to make informed, critical decisions for your business so that you can remain sustainable within this very competitive industry. And with that, ciao.